Hey, stop right there.
The body camera footage has been played repeatedly.
Stop tensing up, dude.
It's been analyzed and dissected.
No, I am an introvert.
And now, 4 years later, it's expected to take center stage again, this time in an Adams County courtroom, where suspended Aurora police officer Randy Rodema and former officer Jason Rosenblatt are set to face a jury in the death of 23-year-old Elijah McClain.
He was different. Elijah McClain was 23 years old, thin, quiet, deeply sensitive. He spoke with awkward, apologetic charm. He was the kind of person who apologized for existing, not because he had to, but because he felt too much. When he talked to cats, he meowed. When he saw strangers, he waved. When he played his violin, he did it in parks and on sidewalks, just to bring comfort to anyone who might need it. He wasn't loud. He wasn't threatening. He was the kind of person people described as sweet, quirky, gentle. He worked as a massage therapist in Aurora, Colorado. His clients loved him. He never charged too much. He believed in healing. He read books about the soul and the body and the space between them. His coworkers said he brought a kind of light into the room. He had anemia and often wore a ski mask to stay warm, even in summer. Sometimes he danced when he walked, headphones in, listening to music that no one else could hear. And on the night of August 24th, 2019, that quiet music was interrupted forever. IT started with a call that a man in Aurora dialed 911 and reported seeing someone acting weird near Billings Street. The person was wearing a ski mask and flailing their arms. He wasn't armed. He wasn't threatening anyone. The caller even said, "I don't think he's dangerous or anything." But the call was logged, the location tracked, and officers were dispatched. Elijah had just stopped at a convenience store to buy iced tea. He was walking home, alone, hoodie up, headphones in. He was dancing a little, his usual movement. Hands relaxed. No crime committed. Point 3 officers responded: Nathan Woodyard, Jason Rosenblatt, and Randy Roedema. What happened next was recorded on body cameras, but the footage went sideways, dropped, interrupted, muffled. The visuals failed, but the audio did not. The officers approached. They told Elijah to stop. He was confused. He hadn't done anything wrong. He said so. "I have a right to go where I am going," he said, voice high and polite. They grabbed his arms. "I'm an introvert. Please respect the boundaries that I am speaking," Elijah said. Within seconds, they forced him against a wall, tackled him to the ground. "I'm sorry," Elijah pleaded, breath hitching. "I'm just different, that's all." They wrestled with him, claimed he was resisting, though there was no weapon, no threat, no lunge, no swing. One officer put him in a carotid hold, a chokehold meant to restrict blood flow to the brain. Elijah went briefly unconscious. He vomited. He cried. When he came to, he was gasping. "I can't breathe," he said. "I'm just different. I'm sorry. I wasn't doing anything. I'm sorry. I don't do drugs. I don't have a gun. I don't even kill flies." They mocked him, laughed, told him to stop moving. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I'm sorry. I can't breathe." He apologized over and over, disoriented and slipping into panic. He tried to explain himself, not realizing that his words weren't being heard anymore. His body was limp. His mask had slid down. His breath became uneven. His heart rate slowed. Then came the medics. The officers had called paramedics to the scene. Elijah wasn't fighting. He wasn't even speaking. But they told the medics he was in an excited delirium, a term often used to justify force on suspects in distress, though widely criticized by medical experts, without checking vitals, without questioning the need, without ever speaking. To Elijah, they injected him with 500 milligrams of ketamine, a dose meant for a man over 200 pounds. Elijah weighed 143. Within minutes, his pulse disappeared. He was loaded into an ambulance. He went into cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital. He was revived, briefly, but remained unresponsive. Doctors declared him brain dead. On August 30th, 2019, Elijah McClain was removed from life support. He never opened his eyes again. After Elijah McClain died, there were no protests and no arrests, no firings, no national headlines. Just a quiet press release from the Aurora Police Department claiming their officers had followed protocol, that Elijah had suffered a medical emergency, that the ketamine was standard, that everything had been done by the book. The case file was thin. The internal investigation was faster than anyone expected. By November 2019, the district attorney announced no charges would be filed against the officers or paramedics involved. DA Dave Young told Elijah's mother that the evidence didn't support a prosecution, that he believed the officers acted within their legal bounds, that the use of ketamine wasn't something he could question. Elijah's family, led by his mother Shanine McClain, was devastated. Outraged. She had buried her son. She had heard the body cam audio. She had watched him apologize as he died. And now she was being told that no one would be held responsible. So she began to speak. She stood outside the Aurora courthouse with homemade signs. She gave interviews to anyone who would listen. She described Elijah's quirks, his love of animals, how he used to play the violin for shelter cats on his lunch break. She released the audio of his last words. She pushed. Alone, at first, the world was busy. There were other cases. The moment passed until another moment came. May 25, 2020, the day George Floyd was murdered under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer, the world caught fire. Protesters poured into streets across every major city. Banners were raised. Names were shouted. And among them, a new name emerged, Elijah McClain. His story spread like wildfire. His last words, "I'm just different," were printed on signs and shirts. Celebrities posted about him. Athletes knelt for him. Activists demanded justice. Protesters staged violin vigils in his honor. Entire orchestras playing in parks, surrounded by riot police. Suddenly, Elijah was everywhere, not just a name. A symbol of how even kindness couldn't protect a black man from systemic violence. By June 2020, the city of Aurora was under siege, not by violence, but by a relentless demand for justice. Over 2 million people signed a petition calling for Elijah McClain's case to be reopened. Artists painted his face on murals. Writers, lawyers, and medical experts began revisiting the case in detail. The more people learned, the harder it became to defend what had happened. The city could no longer ignore it. Colorado Governor Jared Polis announced a special investigation. He appointed Attorney General Phil Weiser to conduct a full, independent review of Elijah's death. Simultaneously, a federal civil rights investigation was launched by the U.S. Department of Justice, FBI, and Department of Civil Rights. Elijah's name now stood alongside George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others whose deaths had ignited a worldwide movement. Every detail of the original reports was scrutinized. The officers' statements were inconsistent. The medics had administered ketamine without ever speaking to Elijah or checking vital signs. There was no clear evidence of excited delirium. Medical experts condemned the justification entirely. The autopsy report, once deemed inconclusive, was challenged by newer, broader scientific interpretation. And the body cam audio, Elijah's cries of pain and confusion, was impossible to ignore. In September 2021, more than 2 years after Elijah's death, a grand jury returned 32 criminal counts against 5 individuals. The 3 police officers involved, Woodyard, Roedema, and Rosenblatt, and 2 paramedics, Jeremy Cooper and Peter Sichuniak. Charges included manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, and second-degree assault. For the McClain family, it wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. Years had passed. But now, there would be a courtroom. There would be testimony. There would be a chance for the world to hear Elijah's voice and the cries he gave that night through the law itself. The courtroom was sterile. Wood-paneled walls, padded chairs, cameras kept out, but in the air, tension, not just legal, moral. The trial of Randy Roedema and Jason Rosenblatt, 2 of the 3 officers involved in the restraint of Elijah McClain, began in September 2023. Both men pleaded not guilty. They insisted Elijah was resisting. They claimed the hold used, the carotid chokehold, was authorized by department policy at the time. They blamed the medics for the fatal ketamine. But the prosecution had one powerful weapon, Elijah's voice. The jury listened to the body cam audio, the final minutes of a young man begging for air, apologizing, vomiting, fading. They heard officers laughing after the injection, joking, calling him crazy. The footage showed a limp body being handcuffed. The medical records showed Elijah's oxygen levels plummeting after ketamine. One expert testified that the dose was excessive, that his body couldn't handle it. that the medics relied on flawed information, that the excited delirium label had been used to fast-track sedation without clinical evidence. But defense attorneys pushed back. They said the officers feared for their safety, that Elijah had tried to grab at their gear, that the hold was quick, that they couldn't have predicted the chain of events. They blamed chaos, poor training, miscommunication. After weeks of arguments, cross-examinations, and legal wrangling, the jury returned its verdict. Jason Rosenblatt, the officer who first made contact, was acquitted of all charges. Randy Roedema, who had testified to holding Elijah down and calling out he's out, was convicted of criminally negligent homicide and third-degree assault. That a split result. Some wept. Others clenched their jaws. Elijah's mother sat quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Justice had come. Partially. Then came the trial of Nathan Woodyard, the officer who applied the chokehold. His trial concluded in October 2023, despite being the one who rendered Elijah unconscious. Woodyard's defense argued he had disengaged once medics arrived, that he hadn't participated in the ketamine decision, that he had been trained to use the hold, and had followed that training. The jury deliberated. Hours turned to days, and again, acquitted in O conviction. The most violent act, the carotid chokehold, had no legal consequence. Shanine McClain left the courthouse in silence, but her pain was louder than any verdict. The final trial came. In December 2023, when paramedics Peter Sichuniek and Jeremy Cooper were tried for their role in administering the ketamine. This time, prosecutors leaned hard into procedure. These were medical professionals, trained, sworn to assess, protect, treat. Yet neither had taken Elijah's pulse. Neither spoke to him. They based their decision on the officer's claims of excited delirium and dosed him based on an inflated weight estimate. The prosecution called it reckless disregard. The jury agreed. Both paramedics were convicted of criminally negligent homicide and assault. Sentencing was scheduled for early 2024. For the first time, anyone, had been fully held responsible. The courtroom fell quiet. No cheers. Just long, exhaled silence. Justice, still incomplete, still fractured, but visible. After the final trial, after the headlines faded and the gavel was lowered for the last time, Elijah McClain's story refused to end, because Elijah was never just a name in a case file, never just a victim on a body cam, never just a symbol on a protest sign. He was a boy who hummed songs to stray cats, who twirled and danced through parking lots like no one was watching, who once told his mother that he didn't like touching people, but became a massage therapist anyway, because he wanted others to feel peace. His death became a rallying cry. But his life, quiet, odd, beautiful, became something even more sacred. In the wake of the trials, Colorado passed reforms around the use of ketamine by emergency responders. The state began re-examining protocols around so-called excited delirium. National conversations were ignited about the medicalization of fear, the dangerous marriage between police assumptions and unchecked authority in the field. Activists pushed for more than body cams. They demanded accountability for every profession that wears a badge, not just the ones with guns. Shanine McClain, Elijah's mother, never stopped speaking. She stood in front of city halls, schools, vigils, and press microphones and reminded the world that her son was never violent, never criminal, never deserving of what happened to him. She called for compassion and reform, not revenge. But she never masked her grief. It lived in her voice, in the way she said his name. They never apologized to her. Not truly, she once said she used to watch videos of Elijah dancing in his room, just to remember what joy looked like. Musicians around the country held concerts in his name. Violin vigils became part of protest culture. Artists drew him with stars in his eyes. Murals across Colorado lit up with his face. People who never knew him cried like they did, not just because of how he died, but because of how clearly he had tried to live, with kindness, with weirdness, with music. That he told the officers, "I can't breathe." But it wasn't just air he needed. It was space, understanding, humanity, and in the end, what he gave the world, even in death, was not bitterness, but a mirror. One that asked every person watching to look at themselves and ask, would I have believed him? Would I have helped him? Or would I have looked away? Elijah McClain's death was not the first of its kind, but it was different. Because Elijah hadn't fought back. He hadn't run. He hadn't even raised his voice. And still, he died. His crime was simply existing in a way that made someone uncomfortable. That discomfort became a call. That call became a chokehold. That chokehold became an injection. And that injection became a death sentence. But what happened after his death? The years of pressure, of noise, of names shouted in the streets. Changed laws, minds, and history. In 2020, as protests grew across all 50 states, Colorado passed Senate Bill 217, one of the most comprehensive police reform bills in the country. It banned carotid holds statewide. It required all officers to wear and activate body cams. It removed qualified immunity as a defense in civil lawsuits against police officers. It mandated data collection on use of force. It happened because people wouldn't stop saying Elijah's name. Medical protocols were also rewritten. National organizations like the American Medical Association began publicly denouncing the term excited delirium as unscientific and racially weaponized. Several states began banning paramedics from administering sedatives like ketamine. Based on police instruction alone, Elijah had become the central argument in emergency medicine ethics, a name doctors and EMTs now studied in law and training. But not all changes were legal. Many were cultural. In Aurora, where Elijah lived and died, his memory was painted on walls. His name was etched into music halls, community centers, and classrooms. Local artists held weekly healing nights, events where people gathered to play violins, sing, dance, and remember Elijah as he truly was. Not a statistic, but a soul. Across the country, orchestras performed tributes. From Los Angeles to Atlanta, violinists played solo pieces in city parks, barefoot, hoodie-clad, standing in silence before drawing bow to string. It wasn't protest. It was prayer. In New York, a mural of Elijah was painted 3 stories high on a building in Harlem. The quote next to his face read, "I'm an introvert. Please respect the boundaries that I am speaking." Those words, first spoken in fear, were now etched in permanence. They weren't just a plea. They were a truth. Meanwhile, McClain continued her crusade. She launched the Elijah McClain Foundation, aimed at supporting families affected by police violence and medical injustice. The foundation offered legal aid, therapy access, and educational scholarships in Elijah's name. She said once, in an interview, "My son didn't get justice, but maybe, through him, someone else will." She still visits the spot where Elijah was taken down, sometimes alone, sometimes with candles and flowers, other times with strangers who come just to say they're sorry. They kneel, they cry, they whisper his name. The city of Aurora issued a formal apology in 2021. The officers did not. In 2022, the city agreed to pay $15 million to Elijah's family in a civil settlement, one of the largest police-related payouts in Colorado history. But no amount of money could undo the truth. Elijah died for being gentle in a world that misreads gentleness as guilt, and that truth continues to disturb the American conscience. There are names that disappear into headlines, names that pass through news cycles like debris in the wind. But some names stay, not because they are louder, but because they are softer. And because in that softness, they reveal everything. The system cannot hold. Elijah McClain was one of those names. He became a litmus test for a country grappling with its conscience. Not because he fought back, not because he had a weapon, but because he had none of those things. And still, he died. He apologized as he was dying. He begged for understanding. He spoke not in threats, but in kindness. And still, that kindness wasn't enough to protect him. In that way, Elijah shattered a dangerous myth that respectability, politeness, or peacefulness could save a black life from systemic violence. He exposed a truth many tried to deny, that for some, simply existing is seen as provocation. Even now, in classrooms and courtrooms, in policy meetings and protests, Elijah McClain's name is raised. Not just in memory, but in argument. In every debate over body cams, restraint methods, chemical sedatives, and police immunity, his case is cited. His audio is played. His final words dissected. And every time someone says, "But what if he had just?" the answer is always the same. He did everything right, and he still died. That is the terror. That is the lesson. In the years since, a movement of artists, Therapists, activists, and musicians have taken Elijah's legacy into new spaces. Mental health workshops now carry his story into conversations about neurodiversity and social anxiety. Music teachers invoke his name when discussing the emotional power of violin. Criminal justice classes assign his case as essential reading. And, always, the same question is asked. What does justice look like when the victim can't speak for themselves, and when their voice, recorded as they die, still isn't enough? There is no satisfying answer. The courts handed down partial accountability. Policies changed. Medics were jailed. Officers were charged, some convicted. But Elijah's mother will never get to hear her son play violin again. She will never see him grow into the man he might have become, the awkward, brilliant, radiant soul she raised in a world that was never quite ready for him. Justice came late. Broken. In pieces, but still, it came. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to start something. Not an ending, a beginning.